Welcome to the continuation and the final episode of Graceway's 50th anniversary podcast. It's been a real privilege to be able to sit with former pastors through this church, and just the ability to start with our founding pastor, our first pastor that was called Pastor Meyer, and now to come to our current lead pastor, Bryan Brotherton. Bryan, how are you?
I'm doing okay. Thanks, Shane.
Good.
And thank you for taking this challenge on, leading us through these podcasts, these interviews. I do hope that this is a valuable resource to not only the congregation right now, but for years to come.
Yes, I certainly know for me that it has been just a life-enhancing experience to have these conversations and continue to grow and learn. And you just see how God has worked throughout the course of this. So thank you for allowing the opportunity to do this.
Yep.
So question that we started off everybody. Tell us about how you came to Graceway, at that time called Sauk Prairie Evangelical Free Church, and how long have you been here?
Yeah. Well, it's been 10 years. Let me answer that question first. Been 10 years. Came in October of 2013 is when I started on staff. Prior to being here, I worked on staff as an associate pastor at Grace Church in Normal, Illinois, downstate, center of the state. And we were there for 15 years. Grant was born while we were there. Luke was 4 when we moved there. So that was certainly a place that God planted us, people that cared well for us, and certainly loved being there. About 2012, some changes were going on among staff, and fellow staff member kind of took me under his wing and was trying to strengthen me in some of my leadership skills. And we went from about here to here after 6 months of really concentrated effort on some things. And so I was not the type of leader. I didn't have that particular leadership style. And so we began changing how we were doing ministry there. Instead of one individual having the entire area of responsibility, we began to share that and work instead of silos, thinking more horizontally. And it would have worked, but it seemed like what I specialized in was administration. And so I began doing that for a number of ministries and doing a whole lot less teaching, a lot less preaching. I was preaching maybe once a quarter there, as it was. There were several of us on staff that would rotate through and preaching, so it wasn't frequent. But and I just found my heart growing dissatisfied with the administrative roles exclusively. And so as a part of the process and evaluating that and we just kind of came to a conclusion, it's probably time to start a search. So I actually announced my resignation in November. I gave it privately to elders in September of that year, 2012. And we announced it, though the elders said, "You're welcome to stay on staff. Let's stay through July of 2013 while you search." But we let the congregation know so that they could be praying with us, so they could give us counsel, so they could refer us to places, just a number of things along that way. So we start the search, and there was a EFCA, Evangelical Free Church of America, church in Ohio, close to our mom's. Probably 45 minutes to Christina's mom and maybe an hour to my mom. And so that really piqued our interest. I had never even visited an EFCA church, let alone attended one or pastored one. So when we approached the church and inquired about it, they said, oh, well, we use this ministry match system, which is kind of like online dating for pastors and churches. They ask you 100 some questions and they try to match you up. Visited the church decided we weren't a good fit and moved on. We paid a couple $100 to fill out that questionnaire, and then realized for another $100 they'll share our profile with churches everywhere that are looking, and so that's what we did. And maybe about May, we got a phone call from who was it? Don Price up at Forest Lakes District, and said, Bryan, I'd like to talk with you about a church in southern Wisconsin that your profile has a really strong match for. And so started the conversation, came, visited, I think end of May, began sometime around the early July, for interviews, conversations, a lot of follow-up. Actually, I think I was here either the week of the 40th anniversary. I mean, I remember Pastor Roy preaching that day and the 40th anniversary stuff, and I don't remember if that was a candidating weekend or the weekend before. I don't remember exactly what it was, but we were here for that celebration. In coming, in trying to discern God's call in our lives, God uses different means. He'll use Scripture. He'll use counsel of godly people that know the Word and know you. He will use the Holy Spirit speaking in your own heart as you're praying and you're seeking counsel and confirming or denying stuff. And He uses circumstances. And all of those combining, we just felt that God was leading us here. Fawn Brynick was the secretary at the time when we came. And when we were part of the candidating process, Fawn asked me a question. Bryan, it's evident that you've been called into ministry, but have you been called here to this location? I had to think about that. In fact, I probably took some time and maybe a day or so before I got back to Fawn about it. There was counsel of people who knew us well, who had given us wisdom. The scriptures, as I pored over them and considered, this is what I sense God is the next step in my pastoral ministry. But why here? And I think some of it was circumstances that God used over those different visits with other churches, the one in Ohio, other churches, etc. Christine and I had kind of identified some things like this, don't like that. Want some things that are positive. There were some things that were negative, things that were non-negotiables, things that were just mere preferences. As I was thinking about Fawn's question, I started, we hadn't really written them down. We prayed about them, we talked about them, drives back and forth, etc. And so I started writing them down, and I don't remember how many was on the list. 17 things stick in my head. Whatever it was, as I began writing them down and thinking about ministry here, 16 of the 17 things that we had identified and said, this is what we want or what we don't want. Sauk Prairie Eat Free fit that. And that was just really confirming for us in terms of God was calling it. The one item on the list, we wanted to get closer to our moms in Ohio. This was not fulfilling that. But we felt like this was this was God's call on our lives. So it's been great to be here. This is home. This is family. So
thank you for going through that.
yeah.
I think one of the things that has been most enlightening to me, and what I've appreciated, is watching how God has called people differently out of different spaces. And then now, 10 years back, as you recount and think about those circumstances, that you can see how God was maneuvering, how God was setting up different pieces, that you can come back 10 years later and say, this is home, this is where he called me to be. And it's reassuring as we think about current circumstances or any times in our lives. We don't know exactly at that moment where God wants us, but to put our trust in him that he will lead us if we give him, if we trust in him, that he will lead us to where we're supposed to be. And we may not know that, we may not understand, it may not even be a great experience, that space, but he may be setting us up for something different. And with the benefit of time and looking back, it just reaffirms my faith in his providence as we listen to these different stories of how people were called. So thank you for going through that in that
you're
detail.
welcome. You're welcome.
So now you're making that transition. You see that administrative, you're leaning towards those things, but you have this desire to preach and to teach. And so you move into that lead pastor position. Describe more of that transition from being an associate, being not the person in charge, not the person where the buck stops here, to being the lead pastor in a new church, in a new town, where you don't have the benefit of those relationships that you had at Normal.
Yeah. I think, Shane, one of the things that held me back for many years in pursuing it was, so one of the things that made Normal such a good thing and a good fit and such a blessing, the lead pastor, senior pastor there, and I, he was there before I came on, and so we spent 15 years together. One of the things that made that work so well is we were very different. We were complementary to each other. We were not the same. We didn't think the same. We saw things differently. I've joked about it before. Pastor Ed was this visionary. He could walk into a room, hear the situation, and just immediately see, well, this is the path we need to go. Let's take that. I could have been in that same room looking at it for days and wouldn't have seen that pathway. His ability to spot those things was uncanny. My role was then to take that dream or that plan and then lay out the details and sequence it and think things through. And inevitably, my list would get just excessively long, and I'd want everything checked and T's crossed and I's dotted, and he's like, Bryan, just get the plane in the air. We'll figure out how to fly it later. Just let's move on this thing. And my response usually was, well, that's fine, but the people riding in it would like to know we've got fuel. So can we at least check some of this before we race into this? So we were a good balance for each other. I learned a lot, but I had his personality, his gift mix, his leadership style fixed in my head. That was the model that was before me, and I kept looking at that and saying, I can't lead like that. That's not my gift set. I'm not fit to function in that role. So I think some of that transition was getting comfortable with who God had made me to be, and realizing I don't have to be the smartest person in the room. If I can help pull ideas out of others and build consensus and we together move towards something, that's still a form of leadership, even if I didn't come up with the idea. That freed me up, and I think it was helpful actually to have gone through that 9-month process with my friend who was trying to stretch me and grow me to finally come to a point of saying, okay, I could get a little bit better with this, but why don't I just focus on what I am strong in and then surround myself with people who do have those gifts. Let's try to go at it in that direction. So when I think about the transition, that's one of the major hurdles that God cleared for us in coming and stepping into this role. Sauk Prairie Free welcomed us, and I think particularly of the care of our son Grant. When we first moved here, he was going into the 7th grade. We moved, I think it would have been after the start of the school year. You know, he's a month in. There were a lot of challenges for him, and people cared well for him, and we're just really grateful for that. That was significant.
So as you assimilated here, this became home, this became family, memories started to form as you had a shared experience. What are some of those favorite times, favorite memories of your time here so far?
Yeah. Shane, I think of just times here in the foyer after service, and there are times when I'll come out and I'll just try to kind of find a spot someplace where I've got a vantage and just sort of scan the room and watching people interact with each other. Similar things at potlucks and gatherings down in the gym, and just take it all in and watch the laughter and the conversations and the hand on a shoulder, and you know, somebody over here is getting prayed for, and just watching the body at work has been a joyful experience. I think of times of just one-on-one conversations, or smaller groups, whatever. But times of being able to open the Bible with somebody who's either uncertain of their faith or struggling with a certain thing, and we look at this text together and just try to unpack that, and the light bulb moment for them, or a sense of, oh, that makes sense. It's just like, that so feeds my soul. I can certainly remember times of laughter and pranks, or you know, whatever, but the things that come to my mind are you know, those body life and times of interacting with people.
I appreciate those overarching themes as opposed to specific memories, because in this day of you know, loneliness epidemic, or as social relationships have evolved, and then that question of why am I here? That's an age-old question, but is as strongly now to hear those two themes of relationships and of the Word and of the purpose and of the hope that we have in Jesus. It's just powerful to hear that's where when you run to that's where you pull strength and joy from, and purpose in your mission. So thank you. How has God used your time here at Graceway as a pastor, but just as a person, to help you grow in your faith?
Sure. Yeah. Uh, Shane, I have needed to learn, maybe it's part of this last question of transitioning to a lead pastor role. The wider the audience that you're speaking to, the larger number of people that you can offend in a moment. And I have had to learn. I'm usually pretty careful about my words, to the point that Adam teases me about, victim of the pause. You finally spit it out. Let's go. And my wife is she certainly understands that. But I'm sometimes in preaching, I have said some things that have been injuring, and learning to deal with my pride and self-defensiveness, and get past that and say, I was wrong about this. I'm sorry, and I recognize how that hurt. Has been a learning process. I think it's one of the things that God's dealing with me, continuing to deal with me about. There's always a temptation to be prideful, and let that change the way in which we ought to conduct ourselves. But that's one thing that immediately comes to my mind, how God is in this ministry, stretched me, grown me, challenged me. So,
yeah, thank you for being vulnerable with that and with sharing, that part of it. As a leader, sometimes it's hard to be in that position, and to be able to say, "Yep, I'm sorry," and to move forward with that. So, thank you. So God has given you opportunities here that are different than some of our previous pastors who've had the opportunity to be here. One of those was having the church locked down for a pandemic. I don't think we've had that in the past 50 years, so congratulations. So speaking of a time of a lot of those things you're talking about, where choosing words was careful, as polarization and divide were in that. What did God specifically teach you during that unique period of ministry and life here? And how did you see him at work, both in the church and during that time frame in general?
Sure. Yeah. Things God taught me. I learned in that time that I am lousy at reading other people's minds. I should have known that before that, but there were so many instances where this was so polarizing, it was so dividing, that when you heard of someone's preference on whatever the issue was, and their what end of the spectrum they were on, there was this assumptions that would just quickly rise in my head of why they would take that position. One, there were times I was lousy at predicting where people would find themselves. I kind of thought I was going to be able to place people on a map here, and I was absolutely terrible at that. And then I'd discover where they were, and then I'd assume what it was, and that wasn't good, and that led to some hard conversations, and yet good conversations that were important to sit down and and slow down enough to ask and clarify and listen. Listen to understand, not listen to, find the chink in their armor. And so, yeah, I'm just not good at reading people's minds. As things have died down, I think I'm back at trying that more frequently, but I need to be reminded of that. And I think we as a people need to be reminded we're not good at that, and we really ought to ask and listen as a part of that. As far as God's work, we looked here recently in this study of the book of Ephesians. We hit chapter 4, and Paul admonishes the congregation there to work hard to strive at maintaining the unity of the Spirit. And even in that study, recognizing that isn't a unity we have to manufacture. It's something the Spirit already brings. What he's challenging us to do is maintain it. Don't sabotage this. Don't undercut it. Don't destroy it. But work really hard at maintaining, keeping it, guarding it. And I saw God knit hearts back together that had grown suspicious of each other. I saw God maintain unity in situations where people were at different ends of the spectrum. I saw him work through, as I've alluded to, some hard conversations where it could have really gone in a very different direction. And I give thanks for his ministry to this body in preserving and maintaining the level of unity that we experienced through a very divisive, hard situation.
Personally, and on behalf of the congregation, thank you for leading through a tough time. It was just difficult, and there was no playbook to do that. So, thank you for leading.
You're welcome.
You mentioned, Bryan, the series on Ephesians, and that's an example of, in the pulpit, you tend to go verse by verse in an expository teaching style, going through an entire book. Explain how God called you. Said, Bryan, this is how I believe that you're set, and this is how you lead a congregation from the pulpit in teaching, and the value that it brings.
Yeah. Some of that, Shane, probably goes back to the models that I experienced both growing up as well as in seminary years during the time there in Illinois. That was other pastors that I have listened to frequently and been drawn to their ministry and style. So that's been largely what was modeled, and so I borrowed from them. I think some of it has to do with my personality. Again, that same detail orientedness that would, layer out tasks and stuff is one that's drawn to paying attention to those details and getting excited about the details that I've found and wanting to share that with others. And so we constantly run out of time to cover everything I'd like to share. I think there is value though in working through a book as a whole and taking a unit of thought, a paragraph at a time, and wrestling with the meaning of that in light of all the other paragraphs around it, before and after, and I think what I'm trying to do is model for us as a congregation how you can read your Bibles, and how by slowing down and examining and asking questions and looking for the answers to those questions and then tying it back together, you can read and understand. God will give you understanding of these things. Yeah, there are others you need to talk to. There's commentaries, there's pastors, there's Bibles, study Bibles, there's resources, there's the church, the body at large, both those present and those who have gone on before but left their writings for us. All of that is part of the resources, but in part I'm trying to model that. I think I'm as well of it's not that I'm opposed to a series that's topical. I'm just opposed to doing that exclusively. We've done some topical preaching here, but the risk and the challenge of that is I'm trying to decide the frequency and the selection of the topics that this people need and when they need it. And if I spend all my time there, you are going to be subject to my hobby horses and my preferences, and that's what's going to be limited in shaping you. Whereas if we let God's Word, as He's written it out, and the sequence of which and the frequency with which He's brought up topics, to dictate that frequency in our exposure to it, then what He emphasizes gets emphasized in our studies, in our preaching. So that's some of the things that I think push me toward that. Well, honestly, I'm not good enough to do that on a topical, or maybe someday I'll be able to do a whole book of the Bible in a single sermon type stuff. But I look forward to when I get another 10 years of experience and a little more breadth of, maybe I'll be able to do some of that with greater. It's just, you feel like you want to know the details before you talk about the umbrella.
Is there a favorite sermon that you've done, or a sermon series? And then, looking out, what is that, in that 10 years or at the end of that 10 years that you're finally ready to teach this book? Is there a book that you're just excited about?
Okay. Well, looking back, wow. I think somebody else, I've watched your videos here. I think one of the other interviewees probably made this comment, and I relate to it. My favorite book of the Bible is probably the one that I'm currently preaching. And it just kind of keeps sliding from one to the other. I enjoyed the time in 1 John. I went into 1 John anticipating that was going to be all about assurance of salvation, and really found some other things there and a different style of writing than I was accustomed to with the Apostle Paul, and so had to change up how I preached because of that. I enjoyed. I'm enjoying Ephesians, certainly Gospel of John, and one that surprised me of what I learned in going through it, and that surprised me of the congregation's response to, was the Song of Solomon, and talking about marriage talking about God's plan for that, of physical intimacy within marriage, of preserving it for marriage. One of those like light bulb moments for me was in like in Proverbs. It seems like, I believe that's most of those are Solomon's writings, and certainly the early chapters. And Solomon is addressing my son. Listen to your father's counsel. My son, listen to your mother's advice. But when we got to Song of Solomon, it's the daughters of Jerusalem. Daughters of Jerusalem, don't stir up these affections, this love before the time has come. And it's just like, click. Proverbs is for junior high boys, and Song of Solomon is for junior high girls. That's an oversimplification. It's not that boys can't learn from one, and men, women, boys, girls can certainly learn from all of them. But I saw that, and it just sort of clicked with me, and it seemed to resonate with us as a congregation as we were working through that as well. So.
You mentioned.
I'm sorry. No. You asked for future.
Yeah. What would be that
where
future?
were we going to go next?
Yeah, not next.
All right. In the future, some point. What would be a future?
Right.
Book of Hebrews is one of those that you feel like you want to have a lot of Old Testament under your belt. Probably need to, teaching through Numbers was a good prep. Deuteronomy would be another good prep before we try to tackle the book of Hebrews. But book of Hebrews, the book of Revelation. I look forward to working through that. Though it feels like that is going to take a lot of prep time, a lot of understanding. There's a lot of different ways of understanding that book, and so grappling with some of those distinctions. So,
I think one of the hallmarks of these conversations has been the love of the Word and the desire from our pastors, both associate and lead pastors, to stand on the Word. And I appreciate that distinction between the topical and expository, and just that desire to help us understand how to, as lay people, understand how to read the Bible, how to. We talked about with Pastor Anderson memorizing the Word. Talking about here studying the Word, how to look for those details, see it in context, go back when you see this,
Right.
And so just appreciate the long tradition and you continuing that tradition of we stand on the Word. So thank you.
You're welcome. Where stands it written, I think, is an EFCA quote, phrase. Yeah.
So looking hopefully farther ahead, much further ahead. You mentioned 10 years, so if we get another 10 years, that'd be fantastic. And we'll go for more. But when your time is done here, when God has called you to step away from this spot, what's your prayer regarding where God has Graceway? Where does he have this community of believers in Sauk Prairie?
Yeah. Shane, I think biblical health, not that we're unhealthy in dire ways right now, but I think a biblically balanced ministry that is seeing people come to faith because of Graceway people engaged with them in doing life together, sharing the gospel, and the Spirit of God drawing people to Christ as a result of that. And so this wave comes in, and people that profess that faith and announce that through baptism, and then are getting established in that faith and learning how to read their Bibles and and grow in those things, and then learning to serve and in connecting with people. They're in group and spending group life together, and they just kind of like keep moving this wave forward, and then growing in their being equipped to minister to others. So yes, in forms of service, but also in communicating biblical truth to others and teaching it, and then sharing the gospel with another wave that comes behind. I would love to be able to look back and see, like waves on a shore, these generations of new believers coming to faith, growing in that faith, being built up, and then equipped, and then responding to that. And then from those people who are growing proficient in sharing the gospel, then there's sending that continues to happen. And this church has been sending people to other locations, both globally and within Wisconsin, or it's not just that. People that have attended here for a long time moved to Texas, and they're serving in their church and community there, and we're sending and replicating health elsewhere, taking the gospel, taking the word of God, and reproducing that. That would be a great joy. Not that we're not doing anything. Like I'm not saying that we're not doing any of those pieces. Just would love to see the consistency. And God is certainly, we're dependent on Him to bring people to faith. But just wanting to see that pattern grow in consistency for us.
There's been numerous times over the course of your work here where you step out of being measured, of being, you do a good job of keeping yourself at a certain space and certain timber and those kind of things. And when I hear your passion the highest, when you step out of that, is when you're describing exactly what you're describing now, that desire to see God's people equipped, and then using those tools and going out and using that to bring others to Christ and to this experience, while we're relying on God for that piece. And so thank you for emphasizing that here again. That wave example is just a very powerful metaphor as we think about that. Not that first wave crashing in, but that next wave and that next one coming behind it. Thank you for going through all these serious questions. We just appreciate it.
Sure.
And we've heard more about your heart and your soul from being called here to goals for the future. And thank you for choosing Graceway, of heeding that call, going through a very deliberate process, and being willing to give up on that 17th point to do the 16 here.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Yeah.
Give us an update. You talked about Grant being in 7th grade. Coming here. Now he's in college.
No,
So give us an update.
Graduated from college.
Yeah, graduated. Not even. Yeah,
graduated from college last May.
Yeah. So give us an update on your life and family.
Yeah, sure. Christina. Many of you would know, but Christina works here for the school district at the community center. I believe this is her 9th year working there as a teacher's aide, working with 4-year-olds every day, and she comes home with stories, and even when Grant was there, she would have us in stitches as she's got voice inflection, and stand up and put her hand on a hip just like this little girl did, and whatever, just tell us what's going on at preschool that day. She enjoys that, enjoys ministry here is often up in nursery, and really enjoys time with the little ones that way. Let's go to Luke. So Luke and Amy, Luke married in 2018, and he and his wife Amy have moved to New Jersey. Been out there for a couple years now. I'm not sure how long ago it was. A year and a half ago, they bought a townhouse, like a row house. They've got the basement, first floor, second floor, but it's butted right up against another like condo type. And so last June, we went out there thinking we were going to help them with some remodel and some yard work. And yard work is a little bit more in Christina and my wheelhouse. Turns out that the homeowners association kind of frowns on you making changes without approval, and so they weren't quite ready for us to rip shrubs out and stuff. And so we went indoors and he put us to work. Grant went with us as well, and we hung drywall in his living room and kitchen space. So they're making great progress. I'm so proud of him because that is just not in my skill set. He didn't learn any of that from me. He's getting it from, YouTube, figuring out how to do all of these construction and remodel projects and trying to do as much of it as they can on their own. No children, grandchildren there yet. We do have a grand dog named Lucy, and so it's fun to see Lucy when we're Skyping or whatever on the phone with them. Grant graduated from UW Eau Claire last May, took a job at a distribution center for Target out in Iowa, and is in deep trying to learn the processes, learn the people, trying to grow in his supervision skills, and just a really fascinating phase of his career as he's straining for some growth and trying to achieve some goals there. So some good progress for him. Glad for where they're at.
The question that everyone wants to know, are you the best pickleball player in Graceway at this time?
No, not at all. That has been demonstrated repeatedly. When I'm not injured, I'm still getting beat up by a number of men and women who are 10 and 15 years my seniors. So, yes.
Just had to ask.
Yeah, all right.
As you said, thank you for your service to Graceway. Thank you for your service to the Stockbury community. As a longtime resident, a longtime member here, we're certainly grateful for what you brought and what we believe God will continue to bring. So at this point in your ministry, as you consider where you are now as compared to 20, 30 years ago, what wisdom would you share with those coming behind you?
Yeah. Keep fighting against your pride. It will destroy relationships. It will destroy ministries. Keep fighting against it, because it just keeps coming back around. You think you've successfully navigated this one. Okay, I've dealt with it, and lo and behold, it just rears its ugly head yet again. So just keep fighting against your pride as it rises. You know, can't do better than what Paul would say to Timothy, preach the word in season and out of season, when it's popular, when it's not. Just keep honing in on that, make it understandable. At whatever age level you're ministering, to whatever group he has placed in front of you, preach the word, communicate it, proclaim it. Don't be ashamed. And then I'm challenged in his admonition, you know, the things you've heard from me in the presence of many witnesses, entrust these to faithful men who will be able to teach others also. This thing of intentionally investing in a next generation, and particularly those who will minister, whatever that looks like, leadership, ministry, but entrusting it, and that just speaks of a whole process of investing in them. I think it's something I'm striving to grow in, and I see the great need for it. But I think it's going to prove even more and more important as we proceed. If the Lord waits, if he doesn't come back in a near future here, we're going to need more and more people who are being faithful to communicate that. So,
thank you for that wisdom, and thank you for that challenge as well.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us today, Bryan.
Thank you. Thanks for the invite.
Yeah, this has been really good. As we've gone through this whole series, we've seen these arcs, these storylines that have come through the entire piece. And one of my goals personally, even though I've had the opportunity to sit here face to face, is to go back and to watch from the beginning. Go back to Pastor Meyer and watch in sequentially, and hear these themes. And I'd encourage you, if you get a chance, even if you listen to those last 5 minutes where we ask about this wisdom question, I think there's just lessons, and I think there's things that you can tie together. So just encourage you to dwell on that, and to think of those things. Think of your experience here at this church and in churches in general. And as Pastor Bryan just said, what is our now purpose as we look towards the next 50 years, if the Lord tarries? What is our purpose as a church, and then what is our role as individuals within that purpose? Thank you for joining us. Thank you for being a part of Graceway's 50th anniversary celebration. It has been a pleasure, for certain.